The morning light filtered through the glass walls of Torven Industries as I stepped into the company lobby, my footsteps echoing against polished marble that had once announced my arrival with authority. Now, conversations simply paused, a brief acknowledgement before resuming at the same volume, as if my presence required only the most minimal courtesy. "Morning, Mr. Torven," the receptionist offered with a smile that reached her eyes, but stopped at genuine warmth. Professional, appropriate, dismissive in its very politeness. I nodded, adjusting my glasses as I made my way toward the elevator bank. The open plan office stretched before me, a landscape of activity where my son Kellan's voice carried above the ambient noise of keyboards and phone calls. At 32, he possessed the kind of confidence that filled rooms, the certainty of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "The Henderson account needs a complete restructure," he was saying to a cluster of junior executives, his tone brooking no disagreement. "We're not here to maintain the status quo. We're here to optimize." I approached the group, intending to contribute insights from my experience with Henderson's previous restructuring attempts. The conversation didn't stop, but I felt the subtle shift, bodies angling slightly away, eye contact becoming peripheral. "Dad," Kellan acknowledged me with a quick glance. "We're just wrapping up the Henderson strategy session." "I remember when we first landed Henderson," I began. "They had specific concerns about—" "Right, but that was years ago," Kellan interrupted smoothly. "The market's completely different now. Their priorities have evolved." A few polite nods around the circle. Someone's phone buzzed. The energy of urgent business waited for me to finish speaking so it could resume its natural flow. "Of course," I said. "Just thought the historical context might be useful." "Always is, Dad. Always is." Kellan's tone carried the particular warmth reserved for humoring elderly relatives. "Actually, speaking of context, how are your eyes doing? You were squinting at those quarterly reports yesterday." The observation landed with surgical precision. Several people glanced at my glasses, thick lenses that had grown progressively stronger over the past few years. Age had not been kind to my vision, and everyone knew it. "My eyesight's fine," I replied, though I had noticed some difficulty with fine print recently. "I'm sure it is," June's voice carried from behind me. My daughter-in-law approached with the graceful confidence of someone who had built a career managing brand perceptions. At 29, she possessed an intuitive understanding of how image shaped reality. "But maybe it wouldn't hurt to have them checked before Thursday's meeting. I know an excellent optician. I could even have the lenses adjusted if needed." Her tone was solicitous, concerned, the kind of suggestion a caring family member might make. The group around us nodded approvingly at her thoughtfulness. "Thursday's meeting?" I asked. "The consolidated deal," Kellan said, as if it should be obvious. $10 million in financing. Pretty routine stuff, but we want everything to go smoothly." Routine. $10 million, and he called it routine. I had started this company when $10,000 represented a significant investment, but I simply nodded. "Of course. I'll make sure I'm prepared." "Great," June smiled. "I'll text you the optician's information. Really, Drake, it's important that you're comfortable reading all the documentation." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As we rode up together, the easy conversation from the lobby faded into silence. Kellan checked his phone. June examined her reflection in the polished steel doors. I watched the floor numbers climb and tried to ignore the way the small text on the elevator's inspection certificate seemed to blur at the edges. When the doors opened on my floor, I stepped out alone. Behind me, I heard Kellan's voice resume its confident cadence as the elevator continued upward. "So about the Henderson timeline." The doors closed, and I stood in the hallway, adjusting my glasses once more. The fine print on the building directory across from the elevator was definitely harder to read than it used to be. But my mind was sharp. My judgment was sound. My signature still carried legal weight. I walked toward my office, past assistants and junior executives who offered the same polite, dismissive greetings I had received downstairs. Respectful, professional, and utterly without substance. The morning sun streamed through my office windows as I settled behind my desk. My calendar showed the Thursday meeting in bold letters. Consolidated deal, final execution. $10 million. Routine. I picked up my phone and scrolled to June's text, which had already arrived. Harmon Optical, 3rd Street. They can see you today if you call now. Really think this will help. Helpful, thoughtful, concerned. I set the phone down and stared out the window at the city below. Somewhere in the distance, construction cranes moved with deliberate precision, building something new on foundations that had been carefully prepared. Good construction required both vision and attention to detail. I had built this company with both. Perhaps it was time to remember how. My kitchen at home mirrored the morning's professional isolation. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I moved through routines that had become increasingly solitary. June and Kellan had their own place across town, but their presence lingered in the careful way conversations had been restructured around my diminishing role. I sat at the breakfast table with my coffee and opened my laptop, scrolling through emails that revealed the architecture of my own marginalization. Project updates that had once required my approval now carried FYI in the subject line. Strategic decisions were presented as fait accompli, with my input welcomed but not essential. The pattern had been so gradual I had barely noticed it happening. 3 years ago, I had stepped back from day-to-day operations, proud to watch Kellan take on greater responsibility. He had earned it. Harvard MBA, natural leadership skills, genuine passion for the business. I had been ready to transition into an advisory role, focusing on long-term strategy while he handled execution. But somewhere in that transition, advisory had become ceremonial. I remembered the Brennan acquisition meeting where Kellan had presented a strategy I had developed the night before. He had delivered it flawlessly, fielding questions with confidence, earning nods of approval from the board. When someone asked about the research methodology, Kellan had said, "My team and I spent weeks analyzing the market dynamics." I had said nothing. He was my son. The strategy was solid. Did it matter who received credit? 6 months later, during the Morrison contract negotiations, June had reframed my concerns about liability exposure as risk aversion that could cost us the deal. The room had shifted subtly but definitively in her favor. Her presentation had been polished, persuasive, backed by data that painted my caution as outdated thinking. The Morrison deal had gone through. It had been profitable. My concerns had proven unnecessary, but the precedent had been set. Drake Torven's instincts were no longer the gold standard. Now, 18 months later, I found myself receiving calendar invitations to meetings about my own company, with agendas that had been finalized before my input was solicited. My presence was noted, my opinions were acknowledged, and decisions moved forward on tracks that had been laid without my involvement. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Consolidated deal, final execution, 2 days. Below it, a text from Kellan. "Dad, talk to legal about Thursday. Just standard documentation, nothing you haven't seen before. No need to spend time reviewing everything in advance. See you there?" No need to review. $10 million and no need to review. I set the phone down and walked to my home office, a space that had once been the nerve center of Torven Industries' strategic planning. Now it felt like a museum of past relevance. Awards on the wall, photos of groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, handshake deals that had built the foundation for everything Kellan and June now managed. On my desk, a stack of quarterly reports waited for my signature. I opened the first one and immediately noticed the fine print swimming slightly at the edges of my vision. Numbers that should have been crisp appeared fuzzy. I removed my glasses, cleaned them carefully, and tried again. Better, but not perfect. I picked up my phone and called Harmon Optical. I'd like to schedule an appointment, I told the receptionist. Today, if possible. Certainly, Mr. Torven, Drake Torven. Oh, yes. Ms. June called earlier and mentioned you might be in touch. We have an opening at 2 p.m. Of course she had called ahead. Efficient, thoughtful, taking care of details before I even realized they needed attention. I confirmed the appointment and returned to the quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of steady growth, expanding market share, strategic positioning that would make the consolidated deal a natural next step. Kellan and June had done excellent work. The company was thriving under their leadership. But as I signed my name to documents I could barely read clearly, I wondered when my signature had become a formality rather than an endorsement. The drive to Harman Optical took me through downtown, past the cafe where I used to meet with clients in the early days of the company. The parking garage next to my office building still charged the same rates it had 5 years ago, but everything else had changed. The city moved faster now, with an urgency that matched Kellan's impatience and June's efficiency. I parked across the street from the office and sat in my car for a moment, watching people move in and out of the building I had purchased 23 years ago. Young professionals with confident strides, talking rapidly into phones, managing multiple priorities with the kind of energy I remembered from my own early career. In the elevator, I noticed that the inspection certificate's fine print was indeed difficult to read, but the larger text was clear, and the elevator functioned perfectly. Some details mattered more than others. My phone buzzed with another message from Kellan. June confirmed your eye appointment. Smart move. Want everything perfect for Thursday. Perfect for Thursday. A $10 million deal that required perfection, but not my review. I put the phone away as the elevator reached my floor. The afternoon stretched ahead with the particular emptiness of time that had once been filled with essential decisions. Now those decisions happened in meetings I wasn't invited to, with outcomes I learned about through email summaries. But Thursday was different. Thursday required my signature on documents that would legally bind the company I had built. Whether or not anyone thought my review was necessary, my signature would make their decisions real. Perhaps it was time to ensure I could read what I was signing. The Harman Optical workshop smelled of cleaning solution and precision machinery. Dr. Harman, a man in his 60s with the careful manner of someone who understood the importance of exact measurements, examined my current glasses with professional interest. "When did you last have these adjusted?" he asked, holding the frames up to the light. "About 6 months ago," I replied. "But my vision seems to have changed recently." He peered through the lenses, then at me. "Actually, these prescriptions appear to have been altered. The left lens in particular is significantly weaker than what your eye exam from 6 months ago would indicate you need." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Altered?" "The lens has been replaced. Recently, I'd say. The coating is different from the right lens, and the prescription is about 2 diopters weaker than it should be." He looked at me with concern. "Have you had any work done on these glasses in the past few days?" "No," I said quietly. "I haven't." Dr. Harman nodded slowly. "Well, we can certainly fix this. I can have your correct prescription ready this afternoon. Would you like a spare pair as well? Given your situation, it might be wise to have a backup." "Yes," I said. "A spare pair would be excellent." As I waited for the new lenses, I sat in my car and called my office. Lana Quinley answered on the second ring. At 41, my executive assistant possessed the kind of observational skills that made her invaluable. She noticed things others missed and remembered details others forgot. "Lana, I need to ask you something confidential." "Of course, Mr. Torven. Have you noticed anything unusual about preparations for Thursday's meeting?" There was a pause. When Lana paused, it meant she was choosing her words carefully. "In what sense, sir?" "Any conversations you might have overheard, any details that seemed off." Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Torven, yesterday afternoon I was working late when I overheard a phone conversation in the conference room. Ms. June was speaking to someone about ensuring you wouldn't be able to read the contract details clearly. My grip tightened on the phone. What exactly did you hear? She said the timing had to be perfect, that you needed to feel confident but not be able to actually review the specifics. She mentioned something about lens replacement and said he'll never know the difference until it's too late. Who was she talking to? I couldn't be certain, but based on the responses I could hear, I believe it was Mr. Kellan. The afternoon sun felt suddenly cold through my car windows. Lana, I need you to do something for me. Quietly. Yes, sir. I need you to document the timing of any meetings or calls between Kellan and June over the past week. Calendar entries, phone logs, anything that shows coordination around Thursday's meeting. I can do that. And Lana, this conversation stays between us. Understood, Mr. Torven. I hung up and sat in the silence of my car, processing the implications. My own son and daughter-in-law had conspired to compromise my vision before a major contract signing. They wanted me present, but incapacitated. A figurehead who would sign documents I couldn't properly read. My phone buzzed with a text from June. How did the eye appointment go? Feeling more confident about Thursday? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Very helpful, thank you. I can see much more clearly now." It wasn't a lie. Dr. Harmon called me back into the workshop an hour later. He handed me 2 identical pairs of glasses, my corrected prescription in both my regular frames and a spare pair. I've also prepared a detailed receipt showing the lens replacement we discovered and corrected, he said, for your records. I examined the receipt carefully. It documented everything: the incorrect prescription found in my original glasses, the recent alteration, the correction performed today. Professional, precise, legally admissible evidence of tampering. Thank you, Dr. Harmon. This is very thorough. Vision is important, Mr. Torven, especially when you need to see things clearly. I drove back to the office with my new glasses and spare pair, testing my restored vision against street signs and building directories. Everything was sharp again, clear, readable. In the parking garage, I sat for a moment before going upstairs. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Kellan and 2 texts asking if I was all set for Thursday. I called him back. "Dad, how did the eye appointment go?" "Very educational," I said. "I learned quite a bit." "Great. June will be so relieved. She was worried about you struggling with the documentation." "I'm sure she was. Kellan, I want to confirm something about Thursday's meeting." "Sure. What's up?" "Who prepared the final contract documents?" "Oh, that's all handled. Legal team, June's input on the brand elements, my review of the operational details. Really comprehensive work." "And my role is?" "Just to sign off, Dad. Your approval makes it official, but we've got all the details covered." "I see. And if I had questions about specific clauses?" "Well, sure, but honestly, everything's pretty standard. We wouldn't want to hold up the process over minor details." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "Of course not." "Perfect. See you Thursday morning. This is going to be great for the company." After he hung up, I sat in my car and carefully placed my spare glasses in a small case, which I then put in my briefcase. Tomorrow, I would review every piece of documentation related to the consolidated deal. I would prepare as thoroughly as I had for every major decision in my 30-year career. But tonight, I needed to understand exactly what my son and daughter-in-law thought they had accomplished, and what they didn't know I had discovered. My phone buzzed with a final text from Lana. "Timeline documented. Pattern is clear. Also, they've been copying me on internal emails assuming I won't mention them to you." I typed back, "Forward me everything." "And Lana?" "Yes? Tomorrow is going to be very interesting." My home office at 10 p.m. was illuminated only by my desk lamp and laptop screen as I methodically reviewed every document Lana had forwarded. The timeline she had constructed revealed a level of coordination that was both impressive and damning. 2 weeks ago, June had scheduled a casual lunch with Kellan to discuss Dad's transition timeline. 10 days ago, Kellan had called an emergency legal review of the consolidated contract, specifically requesting language that would streamline execution and minimize delays. 1 week ago, June had researched opticians in my area and made preliminary contact with Harman Optical. 5 days ago, internal emails between Kellan and June discussed managing expectations and ensuring I felt included but not burdened with unnecessary details. 3 days ago, the lens swap based on Lana's overheard conversation. Yesterday, final contract documents prepared with my signature line prominently featured, but no advance copy sent to me for review. The pattern was meticulous, professional, and completely betrayed the trust I had placed in both of them. I opened a new document and began typing my own timeline, cross-referencing their coordination with company policies and legal requirements. As founder and majority shareholder, I retained specific rights that couldn't be bypassed, simply because my family preferred to work around me. At 11:30, I called Hollis Dane, our corporate counsel. Hollis had been with the company for 8 years and understood both the legal framework and the family dynamics that complicated our corporate structure. "Drake, it's late. Is everything all right?" "Hollis, I need to clarify something about Thursday's signing. What are the legal requirements for my participation?" "Well, as majority shareholder, your signature is required for any debt instrument over $5 million. The consolidated deal definitely qualifies." "And if I wanted to modify the terms at the time of signing?" "You have that right, certainly. Though it would require unanimous consent from the other parties if the changes are material." "Define material." "Anything that alters the financial structure, timeline, or fundamental obligations of either party." "I see. And if I wanted to present alternative terms?" There was a pause. "Drake, is there something specific you're concerned about?" "Just ensuring I understand my options, Hollis. If I arrived at the signing with a modified version of the contract, what would be the procedure?" "Well, you'd need to present it before any signatures were executed. All parties would need to review and consent. If there were disagreements, we'd need to postpone until consensus could be reached." "And my authority to do this is?" "Absolute as majority shareholder. Though I should ask, are you anticipating problems with the current terms?" "I'm anticipating the need to read them carefully before I sign." "Of course. I can send you the final version tonight if you'd like to review it in advance." "That would be helpful, Hollis. Very helpful." After we hung up, I spent 2 hours reviewing the contract Hollis sent. It was, as Kellan had said, relatively standard. Financing terms that were favorable, operational requirements that were reasonable, timeline commitments that were achievable. But buried in the subsidiary clauses were provisions that effectively transferred day-to-day operational authority entirely to Kellan, with my role limited to strategic consultation as requested. The language was subtle, legally sound, and would fundamentally alter my relationship to the company I had founded. I wasn't being pushed out. I was being gently, professionally, permanently sidelined. At 2 a.m., I called Hollis back. "I need you to prepare an alternative version of this contract." "Alternative how?" "Same financial terms, same timeline, but with governance provisions that maintain my operational oversight." "Drake, that's a significant change. It would need to be presented and discussed before I sign anything, yes. Can you have it ready by tomorrow afternoon?" "Technically, yes, but this will require explanation to all parties. Kellan and June have been working on this structure for weeks." "I'm sure they have. Can you prepare the alternative or not?" "I can. But Drake, this is going to create tension." "Hollis, I'm 68 years old. I've built this company from nothing. I'm not ready to become a ceremonial figurehead because my family finds my involvement inconvenient. Understood. I'll have the alternative ready by 3 p.m. tomorrow. Good. And Hollis? This conversation stays between us until the meeting. Of course. I spent the remaining hours before dawn organizing documentation, the optician's receipt showing lens tampering, Lana's timeline of coordination between Kellan and June, email threads that revealed their strategy, calendar entries that proved premeditation. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building a case for respect. At 7 a.m. I showered, dressed in my best suit, and placed both pairs of glasses in my briefcase, along with 2 folders, one containing the original contract, one containing the alternative Hollis would prepare. My phone showed 6 missed calls from June and 3 texts asking if I was feeling ready for the big day. I texted back, absolutely, looking forward to seeing everything clearly. Then I drove to the office, taking the long route that passed the construction site I had noticed yesterday. The cranes were already working, building something new on foundations that had been properly prepared. Good construction required vision, attention to detail, and the authority to ensure both were respected. Today, I would reclaim all 3. The morning energy at Torven Industries carried an undercurrent of celebration that hadn't been authorized by the person whose signature would make it official. As I walked through the lobby, conversations buzzed with references to after the signing and once everything's finalized, as if the outcome were predetermined rather than pending my review. Lana greeted me at my office with a stack of messages and a carefully neutral expression. Several calls about post-signing logistics, she said, handing me the slips. Catering for a celebration lunch, press release scheduling, and 3 congratulatory calls from clients who somehow already know about the deal. I examined the messages. Interesting timing for congratulations? Yes, sir. Also, you've been CC'd on several internal emails this morning. They might be illuminating. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the overnight email traffic. The subject lines told their own story. Final preparations, consolidated signing, post-execution celebration, venue confirmed, new organizational structure, implementation timeline, press talking points, Drake's transition role. I opened the last one first. June had prepared a comprehensive media strategy that positioned my reduced role as a natural evolution and strategic transition to advisory capacity. The language was polished, professional, and presented my marginalization as my own choice. The organizational structure email was more direct. Effective immediately after signing, Kellan would assume full operational authority, while I would focus on strategic guidance and industry relationships. My office would be relocated to the advisory floor. My assistant would be reassigned to support active management. They weren't just planning to sideline me. They were planning to do it today, with my own signature authorizing the transition. My phone rang. June's name appeared on the screen. Good morning, Drake. How are you feeling about today? Quite well, thank you. I see there's been considerable planning for post-signing activities. Oh, you saw the emails. Yes, we wanted to be prepared to move quickly once everything's official. Efficiency, you know? No point in letting momentum lag. Of course. And the new organizational structure? Just formalizing what's already been working so well? You'll love the advisory role, much less day-to-day stress, more time to focus on the big picture. I see. And this was discussed when? Oh, we've been developing it for weeks. Kellan has such great ideas for streamlining operations. Really, Drake, this is going to be wonderful for everyone. I'm sure you both believe that. We do. Oh, and I wanted to check, how are your new glasses working out? Feeling confident about reading all the documentation? The question carried just enough emphasis to remind me that she expected me to struggle with the fine print. Crystal clear, I said. I can see everything perfectly now. Wonderful. See you at 10. After she hung up, I called Hollis. Is the alternative contract ready? Just finished. Drake, I have to say, the changes are significant. When you present this, it's going to be a surprise. Good. How significant? The governance provisions maintain your operational oversight, require your approval for major decisions, and establish a collaborative rather than hierarchical structure between you and Kellan. In other words, the way things should work in a family business. Yes, but it's completely different from what they've been planning. This will require extensive discussion. Or they can walk away from the deal. Drake, they've invested weeks in this. Kellan and June aren't going to just... Hollis, they've invested weeks in a structure that assumes I'm incompetent to review what I'm signing. Today they'll learn otherwise. I spent the next hour reviewing Hollis's alternative contract. The language was precise, the terms were fair, and the governance structure preserved my authority while acknowledging Kellan's operational skills. It was what the original contract should have been if they had involved me in its development. At 9:30, I gathered my materials. Original contract in one folder, alternative in another, both pairs of glasses in my briefcase, documentation of the lens tampering and coordination timeline in a third folder, just in case. Lana appeared in my doorway. Mr. Torven, I should mention, there's been quite a bit of traffic in and out of the conference room this morning. Final preparations, they said. I'm sure. Lana, after today, things may be different around here. I understand, sir. For what it's worth, I think it's time. I walked toward the elevator, passing colleagues who offered bright smiles and congratulations for a deal that hadn't been signed yet. The energy was infectious. Genuine excitement about the company's growth, pride in the work that had made this opportunity possible. They deserved leadership that was competent, collaborative, and honest. Today, I would ensure they got it. In the elevator, I checked my spare glasses one final time, then closed the case and put it back in my briefcase. The elevator climbed steadily toward the top-floor boardroom, where $10 million and the future of my company waited for my signature. The doors opened, and I stepped into a hallway that hummed with anticipation. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see Kellan and June arranging documents, checking their phones, preparing for a meeting they believed they controlled. They had planned meticulously. They had coordinated carefully. They had anticipated every variable except one. I could see clearly now. And I had brought my own documents to sign. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I had watched grow alongside my company. This morning, the glass reflected not just the skyline, but the convergence of 3 decades of work, 2 weeks of deception, and 1 moment of truth. Kellan stood at the head of the polished conference table, arranging documents with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing details. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his confidence absolute. At 32, he possessed the kind of presence that made people assume he belonged in charge. June moved around the room with choreographed purpose, adjusting chairs, checking sight lines, ensuring the environment would support their narrative. Her attention to staging was professional. She understood that perception shaped reality, and she had shaped every element of this morning's perception except one. "Dad," Kellan's voice carried genuine warmth as I entered. "Perfect timing. How are you feeling?" "Quite well, thank you." I set my briefcase beside my chair and surveyed the room. "Everything looks very organized." "June's touch," he said with obvious pride. "She's thought of everything." June smiled as she approached, her eyes immediately drawn to my glasses. "Those look perfect, Drake. Much better than your old ones. You'll be able to read everything clearly now." "Yes," I said. "I will." The other participants began arriving with the punctuality of people who understood the weight of $10 million. Petra Solvik from the bank entered first, carrying the institutional authority that came with managing significant financial instruments. Behind her, Hollis Dane moved with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what documents were about to be presented and how different they were from what everyone else expected. "Mr. Torven," Petra said, offering a firm handshake, "congratulations on reaching this milestone. The bank is very pleased to formalize this partnership." "Thank you, Petra. I'm looking forward to reviewing all the terms carefully." Something in my tone made her glance at Hollis, who maintained his professional neutrality with the skill of someone who had spent years managing family business dynamics. As we took our seats, I noticed the recording equipment that had been discreetly positioned around the room. Red lights indicated active recording. Everything said and done would be preserved for legal review. "I should note for the record," Petra said, "that this meeting is being recorded per standard protocol for significant financial instruments." "Excellent," I said, placing 2 folders on the table in front of me. "Transparency is important." Kellan noticed the folders and frowned slightly. "Dad, you don't need to bring anything. We've got all the documentation prepared." "I'm sure you do. These are just my personal copies." June's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Personal copies?" "For my review. I like to read things carefully before I sign them." The room settled into the particular quiet that precedes significant business. Petra opened her portfolio and began arranging bank documents. Hollis placed a single folder in front of him, his expression carefully neutral. Kellan and June exchanged a glance that lasted just long enough to confirm they were proceeding according to plan. "Well then," Kellan said, "shall we begin?" I reached into my briefcase and withdrew my spare glasses case, setting it deliberately on the table beside my folders. The gesture was subtle, but June noticed, her eyes fixed on the case with the intensity of someone trying to solve an unexpected problem. "Actually," I said, "before we begin, I'd like to ensure I can see everything clearly." I removed my current glasses and opened the spare case, revealing the identical pair Dr. Harmon had prepared. As I switched glasses, I caught June's expression, a flash of confusion followed by calculation. "New glasses?" she asked, her tone carefully casual. "Backup pair. I wanted to be certain nothing would interfere with my ability to read the fine print." I put on the spare glasses and looked around the room, letting my gaze linger on each person present. Everything was sharp, clear, perfectly focused. "Much better," I said. "Now I can see everything exactly as it is." Petra consulted her watch. "Shall we proceed? I know everyone's schedule is tight today." "Of course," Kellan said. He opened the first folder and began distributing copies of the contract. "Dad, this is the final version we discussed. Everything's exactly as we outlined." I accepted my copy and immediately began reading, not skimming but actually reading each clause with the attention it deserved. The silence stretched as I worked through the document, my finger tracing lines of text that were now perfectly legible. "Take your time, Dad," Kellan said, though his tone suggested he hoped I wouldn't. "I intend to," I replied, continuing to read. The governance provisions were exactly as I had expected, subtle, professionally worded, and designed to transfer operational control while maintaining the appearance of collaboration. The financial terms were fair, the timeline was reasonable, but the fundamental structure would end my meaningful participation in the company I had built. After 15 minutes of careful review, I set the document down and looked around the table. "This is very thorough work," I said. "Professional, comprehensive, and clearly the result of considerable planning." Kellan smiled with relief. "Thank you, Dad. We really wanted to get this right." "I'm sure you did. However, I have some concerns about the governance structure." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Concerns?" June asked. "Yes, significant ones." I opened my second folder and withdrew Hollis's alternative contract. "Which is why I've prepared some modifications." Petra glanced between me and the new document with the professional wariness of someone who had seen deals derail at the last moment. Hollis maintained his neutral expression, but I caught the slight nod that confirmed he was ready to explain the changes. Kellan stared at the alternative contract as if it were a physical threat. "Dad, we can't just change things at the last minute. Everyone's prepared for me to sign what you've prepared without meaningful review," I interrupted calmly. "That's not going to happen." June's composure finally cracked. "Drake, this is completely inappropriate. We've all invested significant time." "Yes," I said, removing Dr. Harmon's receipt from my briefcase. "I know exactly how much time you've invested, and exactly what methods you've used to ensure your investment would pay off." I placed the receipt on the table where everyone could see it. The documentation was clear, precise, and damning. Lens tampering, recent alteration, deliberate sabotage of my vision. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of recording equipment capturing every word, every document, every moment of what had just become a very different kind of meeting. "Now then," I said, adjusting my perfectly functional glasses, "shall we discuss the terms I'm actually willing to sign?" The silence that followed stretched like a held breath, broken only by the soft whir of recording equipment and the distant sounds of a city conducting business far below our 32nd floor boardroom. Petra Solvik's eyes moved from the optician's receipt to my face, her professional composure intact, but clearly recalibrating her understanding of the meeting's dynamics. Hollis cleared his throat with the practiced timing of someone who had spent years managing delicate revelations. "For the record," he said, his voice carrying the weight of legal precision, "I should note that Mr. Torven contacted me yesterday evening with concerns about the contract's governance provisions. At his request, I prepared an alternative version that maintains the same financial structure while preserving his operational oversight as majority shareholder." Kellan's face had gone pale. "Dad, what is this? What are you trying to—" "I'm trying to sign a contract I can actually read," I replied calmly. Which, as it turns out, became possible only after I discovered that someone had deliberately compromised my vision. I picked up Dr. Harmon's receipt and read aloud. Patient's left lens had been replaced with incorrect prescription, approximately 2 diopters weaker than required. Replacement appears recent, within 48-72 hours. Corrected prescription restored to both lenses. June's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. "This is ridiculous. You're being paranoid." "Lana," I called toward the door. "Could you join us, please?" My assistant entered with the quiet confidence of someone who had been waiting for this moment. She carried a folder that I knew contained the timeline of coordination she had documented. "Lana, could you please tell everyone what you overheard on Tuesday afternoon?" Lana's voice was steady, professional, unembellished by emotion or interpretation. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday, I was working late when I overheard a phone conversation in the conference room. Ms. June was speaking to someone about ensuring Mr. Torven wouldn't be able to read contract details clearly. She specifically mentioned lens replacement and said the timing had to be perfect so he would never know the difference until it's too late. And, based on the conversation, who do you believe she was speaking with? Based on the responses I could hear, and the familiar tone, I believe it was Mr. Kellan. The recording equipment continued its quiet documentation as Kellan and June exchanged a look of mutual recognition that their carefully planned deception had been not just discovered, but systematically documented. "This is," Kellan began, then stopped, apparently realizing that any explanation would only confirm the conspiracy. Petra Solvik spoke with the careful neutrality of someone whose institution had just witnessed potential fraud. "Mr. Torven, are you alleging that deliberate sabotage was attempted to compromise your ability to review this contract?" "I'm not alleging anything," I replied. "I'm documenting what happened and proceeding accordingly." I opened Hollis's alternative contract. "The question now is whether we can conduct this transaction with integrity and mutual respect, or whether some parties prefer to operate through deception." June found her voice. though it carried none of its usual confidence. "Drake, even if there was some misunderstanding about your glasses, the contract itself is solid. The terms are fair. The terms transfer operational control of my company while maintaining my legal liability," I interrupted. "That might be fair in your estimation, but it's not what I'm willing to sign." I distributed copies of Hollis's alternative contract to everyone present. This version maintains the same financial structure, the same timeline, and the same growth opportunities. But it preserves collaborative governance rather than unilateral authority transfer. Petra reviewed the new document with professional efficiency. "The financial terms are identical," she confirmed. "The governance modifications appear to be internal operational matters that don't affect the bank's interests." "Exactly," I said. "Unless, of course, some parties were counting on my inability to read what I was signing." Kellan finally found his voice, though it carried none of its usual confidence. "Dad, we can discuss governance structures later. Let's not derail this deal over your attempt to manipulate me into signing away my authority?" I asked. "No, Kellan. We're going to resolve this now on the record, with everyone present understanding exactly what happened and what's being proposed going forward." I turned to address the room as a whole. "I built this company 30 years ago on the principle that good business requires trust, transparency, and mutual respect. Today, two people I trusted most violated all three principles in an attempt to sideline me through deception rather than honest discussion." The weight of 3 decades of authority returned to my voice as I continued. "I'm willing to sign a contract today. I'm willing to move forward with this partnership, but I'm not willing to be manipulated, undermined, or treated as incompetent by my own family." Hollis spoke into the silence that followed. "The alternative contract preserves Mr. Torven's rights as majority shareholder while acknowledging the operational contributions of all parties. It's a collaborative structure rather than a hierarchical one." Petra nodded. "From the bank's perspective, this is acceptable. The financial guarantees and operational capacity remain unchanged." All eyes turned to Kellan and June. They sat in the expensive chairs they had arranged so carefully, surrounded by the professional staging they had designed, facing a choice they had never expected to make. "You can sign the collaborative agreement," I said quietly, "or you can walk away from the deal. But you cannot manipulate me into signing something I haven't read and don't approve of." Kellan looked at the alternative contract, then at June, then at me. When he spoke, his voice carried the deflation of someone whose confidence had been built on assumptions that no longer held. "The collaborative structure, it's not what we planned." "No," I agreed. "It's what we should have planned together if you had included me in the planning." June stared at the documents in front of her with the expression of someone calculating odds that had shifted beyond recovery. "This changes everything." "Yes," I said. "It changes everything back to the way it should have been." The city continued its business far below as the boardroom settled into the particular quiet of a power structure being rebuilt in real time. The recording equipment documented every word, every signature, every moment of a family business learning to function as both. When Petra finally spoke, her voice carried the satisfaction of someone witnessing a problem solved rather than created. "Shall we proceed with the signing?" I picked up my pen, adjusted my perfectly functional glasses one final time, and signed my name to a contract I could read clearly, understood completely, and approved without reservation. The deal was done. But more importantly, the deception was over. As the meeting concluded and participants began to file out, one chair remained conspicuously empty, the chair that had been prepared for a figurehead who would sign without reading, approve without understanding, and surrender authority without realizing it. That chair would stay empty. The man who was supposed to sit in it had brought his own glasses, his own contract, and his own very clear vision of how his company would be run. The morning sun streamed through the boardroom windows as I gathered my documents, placed my spare glasses carefully back in their case, and prepared to return to the business of running the company I had built, with vision that was now and would remain perfectly clear.